Okay, so the next topic we're going to look at is the paradoxes of tolerance. And paradox means an apparent contradiction. So it's something that feels like it doesn't fit together, some kind of puzzle about the very notion of tolerance. And there are four of these that we'll explore. The first is the so-called tolerant racist. The reason this is a paradox, of course, is because we don't think of racism as being tolerant. So the idea of tolerant racist is a bit like saying a tolerant intolerant person. So let's have a look and see how this particular paradox arises. Well, this is about a person who's racist, who's prejudiced, but decides to keep quiet at work. They do this not out of principle, but simply because they want to keep out of trouble. And if you remember that tolerance has these three components, that you accept something that you object to and their limits, arguably this person is tolerant because they are accepting things they object to, people of other ethnic groups. However, a way out of this paradox is to recognize that real tolerance involves having a reason to object. So the objection component of tolerance can't be based simply on prejudice, but there has to be a real reason why certain things are objected to. The second of these paradoxes is about protecting the intolerant. So tolerant people are very, very proud to defend free speech, free expression. And J.S. Mill's On Liberty includes a whole chapter on this, and the idea of being free to express your opinions is central to tolerance. And if we think about it, this must include the freedom to express offensive views. Because if we said, well, you can say anything you want as long as it's not offensive, how free would that speech really be? One example of this might be the BNP, the British National Party. So tolerant people may well find their views very distasteful, very offensive, very unpleasant, but at the same time they may defend and respect their right to be a legal political party and to express their views. So many tolerant people would very strongly say banning offensive ideas is intolerant. In order to truly be tolerant, then we need to accept ideas, even those we find offensive and distasteful. The third of the paradoxes of tolerance is almost the opposite of the previous one. This is about being intolerant of intolerance. So again, here's the paradox that a tolerant person has to be intolerant. This argument comes from Karl Popper, the philosopher Karl Popper, and he argued that unlimited tolerance leads to the disappearance of tolerance. So if we were to tolerate absolutely everything, then in the end that kind of tolerance would undermine itself. This is related to the idea that tolerance is not indifferent. So tolerant people have very strong opinions about things. Tolerant people care about things. And an aspect of their tolerance may be that they strongly object to and campaign against things like racism, homophobia, sexism and oppression. And part of their tolerance may be a willingness to be intolerant of those things, to really stand up to those things. And the final of these paradoxes of tolerance is rooted in the idea of moral relativism. And very roughly, moral relativism is associated with the idea that you cannot judge the ideas of other cultures. So, for instance, people in Britain couldn't judge Spanish culture for bullfighting. You'd have to say, well, we may not like that, but it's part of their culture, so we have to accept it. We may have the idea that it's wrong to impose our standards on them. And this understandably comes from a reaction to certain kind of colonialist views that would have automatically assumed that perhaps Western ideas were somehow superior to those of other cultures. However, one difficulty with tolerance rooted in moral relativism is how then can you challenge intolerance? If you have this blanket view, you can't challenge anybody else's culture no matter what they're doing, does that leave you unable to challenge intolerance? And recently we've had this example of the girl Malala Yousafzai, who very, very bravely stood up to the Taliban, and she was campaigning for the right of girls to be educated in Afghanistan, and was attacked. She was shot by the Taliban for that. And would we really want to say that we can't judge that for some idea that it's part of Afghan culture or Taliban culture not to educate girls? Or perhaps we would want to stand up to that kind of intolerance without falling into the trap that moral relativism might lay for us. So those are the four paradoxes of tolerance: the so-called tolerant racist, the fact that tolerance protects the intolerant, the fact that tolerance sometimes requires us to be intolerant of intolerance, and the idea that tolerance rooted in moral relativism gives us no authority to challenge intolerance.